Danger Zone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Kev Baker, and you're listening to The Kev Baker Show right here on Truth Frequency Radio, truthfrequencyradio.com. You can also listen to the show over on iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live, TuneIn Radio app, and like I always say, wherever you are, thank you for making it TFR. And what a show we've got lined up here tonight. And to do that, I have got my good friend and my co-host, Mr. Johnny Whistles. Johnny, special broadcast right here on the show tonight with our good friend Anthony Patch. You all locked and loaded for this one, Johnny. Are you awake yet?
Oh, I'm quite awake, Kev, but actually nowhere near as clever as you two people, because both of you actually melt my mind. You were giving me a science lesson, Kev, before the show. Wow. It was like listening to Anthony Patch. Amazing.
Oh, please. And, you know, when we get Ben Emlyn Jones on, we say we're the three amigos, right? So we need something new, Johnny. And we have learnt in recent months and years how strangelets are made up of three quarks. You get an up quark, a down quark, and you get a strange one, Johnny. Now, I was going to go the strange one, but you stole it off me, dude. Whatever, it works. We are going to have an absolutely brilliant night tonight. And like I said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to tell you everything everything you need to know and everything you haven't been told about CERN's AWAKE experiment. Now, we spoke about AWAKE Linear Accelerator on the show before, but to mark the switching on of the machine this year, we're going to be joined by our good friend. Now, what is AWAKE? Well, the bullet point is that AWAKE is an acronym that stands for Advanced Proton-Driven Plasma Wakefield Acceleration Experiment. Now, AWAKE is collaborating with 16 scientific facilities around the planet. And get this, because one of those places is situated right here in the city of Glasgow at the University of Strathclyde. Now, to discuss all of this and to break it down for us, we are joined by our good friend, author, researcher, and fellow host on the network, Anthony Patch. Now, Anthony has authored a number of books, including Covert Catastrophe, 2048 Diamonds in the Rough, and he's a co-author of Revising Reality. He's currently working on his new book, Coalescence. You can find all of that, his research and more, over at anthonypatch.com, and you can hear him right here on Truth Frequency Radio, the home of the Anthony Patch Show, and we're very proud to say that right here on TFR. So to get into all of this and to waste no more time, Anthony, welcome back, brother. So soon, but it's great to have you back. And a big day today, AWAKE. We're back at this again.
Yeah, and thank you, Johnny, for having me back on the show today. We're going to be very technical today, just to warn people, but we'll stick to what is relevant. Why is it relevant? Why are we even talking about this particle accelerator? You know, it's kind of like, okay, this is deep stuff, but you know, I got to go to work every day, so what difference does it make? Well, we're going to show you later on in the show. So that's a little bit of a teaser. Go ahead, Kev.
Over the years, we've all been working together. You really have built up a big audience who really they're hanging off every piece of research you do into all of this, Anthony. And it's great that we can come together, do this on KBS and on your show. And like I say, today, a very special day indeed, because we're used to hearing you and I talking about ring accelerators, the main ring at CERN. But this is a new piece of technology altogether. And you're going to be doing something slightly different tonight, because you're going to be explaining all of this to us, basically using CERN's own words, aren't you?
Yeah, I think it's important to report from the source on an event like this. And so I will briefly be reading some excerpts from CERN's own website. It is important to go to the source, and as you and I both do in our research that we share with each other, we go to multiple sources. We go to laboratories, we go to universities all over the world to their websites. But today, we're going to take primarily just from CERN itself. I do want to clarify a couple of things. today is the start in 2017 of AWAKE. There was a first run in which, as they call it, taking data from the accelerator itself. In other words, there were protons that traveled through the 10-meter long plasma chamber, which is 4 centimeters in diameter, and struck the impact point or the beam dump at the end. And from that, they were able to take some preliminary data, which is all really just a commissioning. So there were some misunderstandings by some other people that were putting the word out through YouTube last year that AWAKE was colliding particles and it was screwing up the magnetosphere and it was causing earthquakes and it was creating wormholes and all kinds of nonsense. Nothing happened last year with AWAKE anywhere near that. So they were simply just commissioning, and really the commissioning started in September of last year, and that simply means that they're taking protons from the super proton synchrotron, the SPS, which is a accelerator that is ring-shaped that feeds or injects pre-accelerated particles into the main ring, where the particles are then increased in speed. They're bumped up by radio cavity and microwave cavity accelerators. But the point is, protons are accelerated starting with a linear accelerator and then a proton synchrotron and then a super proton synchrotron. These are all daisy chained together leading up to the main ring. And it is from the SPS, the super proton synchrotron, that protons at a energy level or acceleration or mass energy equivalency of 400 giga-electron volts are then sent to AWAKE for their experiments. And that's what's happening today. They are moving from commissioning and the first run where they're testing and calibrating into what they call self-modulation instability. So what they're doing is getting the machine stable, is a good way to put it. So today is the start in 2017, and I just wanted to clarify what happened last year. Reading from CERN, the home of the Large Hadron Collider, the LHC, is the world's largest particle accelerator and is now getting a new machine. And this time, the whole point is to keep it small. Again, I said this is a 10-meter plasma chamber. The architecture or the framework that holds that chamber is 30 meters in length, compared to the 27-kilometer main ring of the Large Hadron Collider. So that gives you a quick snapshot and overview. And there are plans afoot, as CERN says, to build larger machines once the LHC reaches the end of its life in the 2030s. Many fear that accelerator size is nearing its limit and that such proposals may simply prove too expensive to implement. When you look at the cost estimates for these machines and the scale of machines, you understand that maybe a new breakthrough regime is needed, says Nick Walker, an accelerator physicist at DESI, Germany's high-energy physics laboratory in Hamburg. Now, DESI is important to understand. That and the Max Planck Institute in Germany are the proof of principle laboratories responsible for the development of AWAKE. AWAKE came from those labs and is now at CERN. That's the quick overview. Continuing here, conventional colliders such as the 27-kilometer long LHC uses electric fields to move charged particles through a tunnel. The fields switch from positive to negative at a frequency that means the particles are constantly nudged forward, gaining energy with each push. But such colliders use metal-walled cavities that spark if the electric field is too strong. As a result, the only way to further increase the particle's speed and therefore its energy is to lengthen the tunnel. That means you need to build a bigger Large Hadron Collider if you want more energy, if you want to get down to the smaller scales of primordial particles. AWAKE is taking a complete departure from that, and they are utilizing lasers, plasma, protons, and electrons in order to accelerate the particles within a plasma utilizing, as Kev said, wakes. And Kev, I'm going to have you step in and talk about the waves and the process of what is going on there in a little different terms so that people can understand that. Go ahead.
No problem. And just to clarify something before I even start, when we talk about AWAKE and the plasma that actually is being used here, don't mistake that for the plasma that we talk about when we're talking about the actual strangelets, that quark gluon plasma. It's a totally different thing. This is plasma, just high energy, a gas heated to a plasma state. So we've got these protons coming in from the SPS. And what happens is, if you imagine them firing into the actual plasma. Now, just like when you have a boat traveling across water, you leave waves, you leave a wake in your path. Now, if you think of these protons then traveling through the plasma, the 10 meters, on the surface of that, you have a wave formation. Now, what they're going to do is they will insert a witness beam of electrons to ride the waves, literally like surfers. And this is even the way that some of the top physicists in the world describe this process. Now, like Anthony says there at the very start of the show, there's a 1,000 times increase that we've talked about in the past. Well, if you think of this 10 meters being a race, and if you compare the plasma accelerator to 10 meters of a ring accelerator, what we're talking about is over that short distance, there is a 1,000 time increase in the efficiency. It's far, far better at accelerating these particles. Higher energies, you get down to these smaller scales, and when you're accelerating particles, it's all about electrical fields. And when you actually fire protons or a laser into plasma, it creates massive electrical fields. And that is what is responsible for this major increase. And this one day could lead to particle accelerators being reduced in size dramatically. We've covered in the show before plans from China talking about super colliders at 50 to 100 kilometer rings. It's ridiculous when you can shrink it down like this. And I hope that really helps people to visualize the kind of science that Tony's talking about here in the AWAKE experiment. Do you think that about covers it, Tony?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I think we can define the plasma just a little bit more for folks. And the plasma is produced by projecting a laser. It's a pulsed laser. Let's call it at a specific frequency of a laser light beam. And if you were to rely just simply on the laser to accelerate protons, you quickly diminish or use up the power of the laser itself. As you move further and further from the laser's energy is absorbed through this process of accelerating protons. And so that reaches very quickly a very short lifespan of that energy. So in order to increase the lifespan of this acceleration, you initiate it with a laser that is shining through what is an element of ionized rubidium. That's rubidium. Rubidium is a chemical element with the symbol R, capital R, lowercase b, with an atomic number of 37. So it's like with most laser situations where you're shining the laser through a ruby or another precious stone. In this case, they're producing from rubidium the actual ionized gas, the fourth state of matter, the plasma that is contained within a 10-meter long chamber. And through that chamber, you're now taking, rather than lasers to accelerate through this chamber, you're taking pre-accelerated particles from the superproton synchrotron accelerator, which ordinarily would be feeding 400 giga-electron volt accelerated protons into the main ring. In this case, they're branching off. They're going through what's known as a transfer tunnel or a transfer tube into and feeding, like I've said before, sort of the breech of this linear accelerator. And it is then carrying and producing waves that will carry the accelerated particles on their waves, on the peaks of the waves, just like a surfer, and accelerating them even further. And through this is a witness beam of electrons. Eventually, they will get to the point, not right now, but eventually they'll get to the point where they're accelerating electrons only, but they're starting with protons right now. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of what's going on. The purpose of this is to reach an eventual point exceeding the 14 tera electron volts that is produced by the main ring of the LHC itself. And as I said last week, the LHC and AWAKE will be conjoined. And how that will be accomplished, I'm going to read for you. It says how AWAKE will be sent to the north area beam dump. Now that's the center point of the main ring. That's where the beam is dumped from the super proton synchrotron accelerator once they're done with it, when they run other experiments. It's also where they dump the beam from the main ring itself, whether they're completed an experiment or if they have a safety issue and have to do a quick shutdown. It says a new primary beam line is designed and built to fulfill the AWAKE requirements for the north area. The proton beam is extracted from the SPS and injected into the LHC, then to the AWAKE, then by transfer line to the north area beam dump. Switching magnets of an MBS type, that's a magnetic bond sensor, are installed to divert the AWAKE beam, along with dipole, which are bending magnets, and quadrupole focusing magnets toward the north area. So, Kev, can you share in the chat room, or Johnny, that one graphic that we were talking about that I refer to as the smoking gun that shows that process, in which it shows layout 1 and layout 2. And I want to just let the people in chat know, this is the closest evidence I could find to the statement I just read to you, that AWAKE will be sending accelerated particles to the north area. And that diagram being the closest we could find in the public domain, I know that there are others because I saw the links that go to a password-protected area of the archives of the CERN servers themselves. So I don't have access to that. But I think this is as close as we're going to get of a diagram of AWAKE being connected to the north area after taking pre-accelerated particles from one of the two contra-rotating streams of the main beam. And here at the beginning of the show, we're kind of giving you the punchline. I've got another punchline I'm going to hold for later. But the point here is, if you want to achieve the highest levels of particle acceleration, you don't rely on just the SPS at 400 giga electron volts. You go from giga to tera electron volts, and you find those tera electron volts within the realm of the main ring, taking only one beam of protons that are moving at 14 tera electron volts instead of giga electron volts, feeding them into this plasma chamber and further accelerating them on these wake fields to the scale of 20 peta electron volts. Those are quadrillions, not trillions. And I'll give you the purpose of that after we complete the first segment of the show here. But I hope that gives enough of background. Do you want to jump in, Kev?
Yeah, I do. I mean, if you think about what we've just said there as well, I mean, we're told that the protons will come from the SPS with a 400 giga electron volt energy, and that's good. So like we were saying, the laser's only efficient for so long, and then you have to look for higher energies. So we're up to the giga electron volts from the SPS. It only makes logical kind of reasoning that with everything they've put into this, all the money that they've spent, all the proof of concepts and all the kind of measurements already taken, that the next step on from that is to go from the giga to the tera. So where do you find that extra energies? Well, you get that from circulating these heavy protons around the main ring. They gain energy every circulation around that electromagnetic ring, and then you feed them in eventually to the awake machine, like Tony's saying, to attain this massive 20 peta electron volts. To me, Tony, it only makes sense that that's the next logical step in all of this.
Yeah, it really is. And again, we'll give you one of the big punchlines a little bit later in the show, but I said we're going to be technical today, and I really want to do that because I want to demonstrate that Kev and I are doing our research here. So I'm going to read a little more of that technical information from CERN. The world's first proton-driven Wakefield accelerator experiment, AWAKE, is presently going online at CERN. The experiment will use a high-energy proton beam extracted from the SPS as a driver. The first proof of principle experiment uses proton bunches to generate plasma Wakefield acceleration. AWAKE will use high intensity, up to 3 times 10 to the 11th power, okay, of protons per bunch. Okay, so it's 3 times 10 to the 11th power of protons per bunch. And the high energy, up to 400 gigavolts of proton bunches produced by the SPS. So we're being repetitive, but I know people straggle into the show, so we're kind of repeating things a little bit. When the 12 centimeter long proton bunch, and there's only one bunch, as opposed to other experiments where they're using thousands of bunches and literally into the millions of bunches together in the main ring. Here we're taking one 12 centimeter long proton bunch, and it enters the plasma cell and undergoes a self-modulation instability, SMI, which produces microbunches spaced at plasma wavelengths. So what they're doing is breaking up this 12 centimeter long bunch to match up to the wavelength of the plasma within the chamber. So again, loading the breech of the rifle is what I described.
And of course,
they use a
4 centimeter diameter. I mean, does that tie into this as well with the wavelengths?
Yeah, that's the diameter of the chamber. And so, yeah, that is going to constrict or restrict the size or the top of the peak of the waveform itself, the wavelength.
So what if you made one that was 8 centimeters in diameter, twice the plasma? Would you get a twofold increase?
No, I think what you'd end up is you'd have a dissipation of energy. And so it's just like in the LHC, they use collimators, magnets, to squeeze down and concentrate the bunches into a very tight beam. I think that's the same direction they're headed with this, is to move from 4 centimeters down to a smaller confinement in which you have a higher concentration of microbunches, and that will give you a higher yield of energy as well as a higher acceleration.
There you go. I'm sorry, Tony, I interrupted you there.
No, that's okay. We're about to go to break. I'll read just one more sentence here. The laser itself is a 2 terawatt laser pulse, co-propagating and coaxial with the proton beam, and that's used to ionize the plasma and seed the bunch modulation in a controlled fashion. A witness bunch of electrons can be injected downstream from the self-modulation instability saturation to probe the longitudinal Wakefield. So they have to have a way to measure the stability of what's going on here. And what they're achieving right now in this startup today is what I said earlier. They're setting up this self-modulation instability, this control factor is what they're doing right now. It's not necessarily that they're colliding particles or realizing, new energy levels. So we're about to go to break. Go ahead, Kev.
And just to reiterate, it's not a particle collider. It's a particle accelerator. This is a linear one. It's far smaller. I like it. And when Tony's talking there about waves and the witness beam, that witness beam is the surfers, if you want to picture those electrons, whatever particles they choose to be riding along in these waves. Bigger the waves, higher the energy. Higher the energy, smaller the scales you go down to. We're getting back to those quantum scales again that we've been talking a lot about with Mr. Patch. We'll be back after the break for more smoking gun evidence with the big man himself, me and Johnny Whistles. So don't go anywhere, folks. Are you awake yet? I hope so. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're tuned into the Kev Baker Show on Truth Frequency Radio, truthfrequencyradio.com. Myself, Johnny Whistles, and Anthony Patch along for the ride tonight. We're marking the restarting of the AWAKE Linear Accelerator down at CERN over in Geneva, Switzerland. And we were getting into some very, very technical stuff just before the break. And we've got such an intelligent audience. Just looking at the chat room, they're all still discussing the topics we're on, Tony. And I know that we've got a couple of other things to say about AWAKE, and there's some other areas we're going to move into as well. But just to kind of encapsulate everything for the listeners out there, AWAKE, it's re-switched on. Where would you, or what thoughts would you like to leave the listeners with on this new experiment, Tony?
I'm going to go just a little bit more with some of the details, because there are people that appreciate the raw numbers of what we're talking about. And then I will talk a little bit about what actually I project is going to take place at the north area when they achieve 20 peta-electron volts. And that'll take us to the halfway point in the show. And I'll tell you what, we're at the halfway, aren't we, Kev?
We certainly are, Tony. We've just got by there. You see, you've gone into one of these time warps again. There is no time at the quantum
There
scale.
is no time.
Exactly.
Nope, not for me. So the last 15 minutes of the show, we are going to announce something that we're going to really elaborate on Friday, which is a completely new discovery for Kevin, myself, and some other researchers that I know is just going to drive the audience crazy when we announce this. Anyway, back to the details. Simulations predict that up to 40% of the injected electrons can be trapped and accelerated from 20 mega electron volts up to 2.1 giga electron volts over a 10-meter plasma cell. So they're going from 20 mega electron volts up to 2.1 giga electron volts in just 10 meters. I mean, if you put that in comparison to a 27-kilometer ring, that's almost an instantaneous acceleration is what that translates to. As I said, it employs one bunch containing 3 times 10 to the 11th power of protons. One beam position monitor, a BPM per corrector of 23 in total, is installed for trajectory steering. That's how they steer the beam, is with a beam position monitor. One beam current transformer is placed at the end of the underground area and one at the beginning of the trench to dump and to measure changes in the beam current, indicating potentially dangerous losses in the surface area. In other words, they're able to, within AWAKE, do their own beam dump if they run into problems or at the end of the experiment. Now, there are a lot of other details, but I really am going to try to shorten this up. Just a little bit of background. The plasma Wakefield accelerators were first proposed in the 1970s and are designed to break this cycle of larger and larger synchrotron or ring-based accelerators. I'm skipping down through here.
And you know, the eventual goal of this, as Rebecca always posts in the chat, I hope she does again, is the fact that they're basically wanting these down to the micro scale, Tony. Micro accelerators. That's where we're heading for here. And all of this is a step towards that, I imagine.
Yeah, you know, this is so funny. We're so quantum entangled. That's the exact next paragraph I was going to go into and talk about Stanford. Yeah, because we have said before in other shows that Stanford, with the Stanford Linear Accelerator Laboratory, that they have developed accelerators on a chip. And over that short distance in the chip, they're able to achieve 1,000-fold greater acceleration potential than their 2-mile-long linear accelerator. So again, we're looking at old technology, new technology. We're moving from a large ring to a 10-meter plasma chamber, and Stanford's going from a 2-mile-long accelerator, or linear accelerator, to a chip-sized. Now, there's different applications for the two types of linear accelerators. AWAKE is still quite a bit larger, obviously, than a chip-sized. Different applications, primarily the chip-sized will go right into medical research and medical applications. That'll be predominantly where they're going. I'm going to read just one more thing here. Because protons have greater mass than electrons, each proton pulse penetrates further into the plasma. That's why they use protons, okay, because of their penetration and then their ability to be set up on the wave, setting up for a longer series of charged regions, which in turn provides greater acceleration per pulse. A proton machine is also capable with the LHC, which accelerates and collides protons. So I'm going to reread that sentence. A proton machine is also capable with the LHC. He's talking about the main ring, not just the SPS. A proton machine is also compatible. Sorry, I mispronounced that. A proton machine is also compatible with the LHC, which accelerates and collides protons. Right there, this quote coming from CERN, coming from Mark Hogan, who's one of the accelerator physicists at Stanford, who's working with CERN, working with AWAKE. He says that the machine is compatible with the LHC. That means the conjoining, the use of one beam from the LHC to feed into the AWAKE. That's where the 20 peta-electron volts comes into play. So that's a smoking gun for what I've been claiming for a long time now, along with Kev, is that they're conjoining the two accelerators. All right, one more quote. Eventually, it might be possible to inject the much higher energy protons that have been accelerated by the LHC into a plasma Wakefield machine for further acceleration. Hogan estimates that a machine just a few kilometers long could produce electrons with 6 times the energy of those that would be produced by the next planned conventional, that means ring-based, conventional accelerator, which is the 31-kilometer long International Linear Collider. So he's comparing a conventional accelerator and even going to the 31-kilometer linear collider. He is saying that with the conjoining of the main ring with AWAKE, they can see 6 times the energy that would be produced by a larger ring-based collider. And even the 31-kilometer linear that they're proposing, the International Linear Collider. So this is quite substantial. Go ahead.
People out there who are thinking, well, we heard 1,000 times more powerful. And myself and Tony will admit that in the past, we probably have been quite ambiguous on that. In fact, we were probably wrong, because what the actual case is, it's 1,000 times more efficient over a short distance. But when you actually look at it, like Tony explained there, when it comes down to it, in the end of the day, when they incorporate it with the LHC, it will see a 6-fold increase in the energies. That's about right, Tony, yeah? That's
exactly it. And I think that we are the first ones to clarify and even self-correct. I agree with you. We didn't quite understand it. I didn't quite understand it well enough to realize where this figure of 1,000 was coming from. And today, with our collaborative research, Kev, you and I really pinned it down, and we found, again, another smoking gun. I think we are the first people to break publicly, outside the scientific community, so to speak, that they will achieve a 6-fold power increase. And so you'll see other people that'll grab that number and run with it. They'll start saying they found the
And we know,
six-fold power increase.
yeah, we know people will deny this and they'll criticize Tony and myself for daring to even put this out. But remember what we said at the start of the show, slightly different tonight, because we're using CERN and particle physicists' own words. This is what they're saying. Now, some of the metaphysical stuff and some of the stuff we're about to move into in a moment, no, we can't find stuff about Osiris's head in the publications of CERN. But when we're coming to this hard science like we've just been showing there and just been laying out, this is in their own words. And it's really important to me anyway, and to Tony and Johnny, that people understand that. This isn't some kind of fantasy land. We're not just bringing Tony on here and making stuff up. He's basically reading from their own work. And think of the times when he's told you about power levels and strangelets, only for CERN to come out afterwards and confirm what has been called ridiculous claims. The guy is on it, and that's why myself and Johnny and TFR were so lucky to have Tony here. And we're lucky we've got an audience like you as well, because if the chat room is an indication of what everyone's thinking, Tony, then they totally get where you're coming from. It's really hard to understand, but we get it across there. Now, we're going to move into what this is all about. And I mentioned Osiris's head there, Tony, and I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, and, you know, if we didn't have an audience to speak to, then there wouldn't be any purpose in doing this. We don't need to talk to each other, you know, over the radio like this, so to speak. You know, it's about serving the audience. It's about sharing information for the benefit of other people. That's what drives us. That's what linear accelerates us in our research, if you will. So where we're going is, Kev, what's your quote that you said about understanding the present by looking into the past? Would you say that for the audience, please?
Yeah, if you want to understand the science of present day, you have to look to the past.
I think that sums up where we're going right now, because in order to find proof of what I'm referring to as the head of Osiris, you have to look into Sanskrit, you have to look into Egyptology, you have to look at Nimrod and the stories in the Bible about the Tower of Babel. You have to understand the nature of Nimrod, what bloodline he comes from, which is from the bloodline of Cain, and understand the significance of that, and also the belief system, the worship of the god Osiris. So when I say that the head of Osiris, I'm also talking about really the head of Nimrod, who was both a human and a demigod. He had actually modified his own DNA to the point where, according to the stories, according to the written record, he was both immortal and mortal in that sense of having modified his DNA. Now, where I'm going with this is that Nimrod's DNA was preserved after he was cut up into 14 pieces, and his head was placed in a jar, and that was the DNA of Nimrod. And it's preserved by what is known as the sacred fire. That is monoatomic gold, and I'm being repetitive here. Some of the people in the audience have heard this before. But that sacred fire has preserved his DNA until these times. And we are in the time of resurrection. We are in the time of achieving immortality through technology. This agenda at CERN is all about immortality. It's about raising the dead through the doorway to the abyss. It is about the combining of spiritual deities, spiritual entity with resurrected DNA, and also DNA that is built from the quantum scale, from the raw building blocks of quantum particles. But focusing specifically on the DNA of Osiris Nimrod, his DNA, his head, if you will be placed in the north area impact point, which is tons of iron, lead, concrete, and some other configurations. But the point is, this is an underground chamber, and I have sent Kev drawings of this from CERN, CERN's own drawings of this chamber, this impact area. And that is where they will place the DNA. The DNA serves not only for the resurrection of Osiris Nimrod, but also concurrently the opening of the abyss, which is achieved through the separation of strangelets. Now we come full circle, because Kevin and I have been talking for days about the confirmation of the production of strangelets at CERN, and this has been going on for far longer than just back in 2015 when we first started talking about this. It is the separation of quarks, strange quarks, up quarks and down quarks, the separation, the breaking of the nuclear binding quarks that results in the opening of the interdimensional doorway to the abyss. So these are concurrent events, and from that you are seeing the resurrection of the DNA. We don't have time today, and we'll pick it up on Friday, and we'll get into more of the details as to how that DNA is actually resurrected. But it is the impact of 20 peta-electron volts of accelerated particles from AWAKE and the main ring that will be focused, and I'm thinking later on this year. AWAKE's going to be running until December, maybe around September, because of things that are happening in the heavens, things that are happening with the Vatican, things that are happening politically. And again, we'll go into that in more detail on Friday. But there is a coalescing that's coming together in September that makes me very suspicious of what perhaps might be the timing for the events that I just described. So go ahead, Kev.
People out there thinking, but this is like a science facility. It's the biggest machine in the world. What are you doing talking about Nimrod and stuff like that? And to people that say that, I would say, well, you answer me this. Riddle me this, will you? Why do they have a statue of Shiva in the grounds? Now, that in itself shows you that you cannot separate the spiritual and the science. And these cats, they know that, Tony. They absolutely know that. And from time to time, we come across these rich veins of research, and people out there in our audience bring us literal golden nuggets of information that blow us away, and yet connects everything, absolutely everything we're talking about. And it's usually timely interactions with the audience, Tony, isn't it? They bring you these gold nuggets.
Oh, it's just miraculous, as I call it, the exquisite timing of our Lord, because I'm a born-again Christian and dwelt with the Holy Spirit, because I renounced my sins. I asked for forgiveness. I begged for forgiveness for my sins, and that was my salvation. And so when I speak of these things, I'm speaking it to you from a Christian perspective. And when I talk about resurrection of the dead, it's from that Christian's perspective. But also from that, I call this timing God's exquisite timing, because time after time, it's just-in-time delivery. Yesterday, I received one of the biggest gold nuggets of research I have ever received. And this comes from Julie. And she's been in the chat room. She listens to all these shows. Julie, I am so grateful, and we've been corresponding by email. What I'm getting at is called, and Kev, if you haven't already, put up a picture in the chat room. This is the Shiva Lingus, Lingas, Shiva Lingus. I have yet to see this on Discovery, History Channel, National Geographic, whatever. I have never seen this on television. I haven't owned a television in 7 years, but again, Kev even said he had never seen this. Johnny said he had never seen this.
And Tony, I am a huge Ancient Aliens fan. I'm like a Giorgio fanboy. And you would think ancient stone structures, Hindu gods and stuff like this, it would be all over it, right? You see the H blocks at Pinka Pinku all the time. But this stuff, it is never talked about on Ancient Aliens, Tony. And like you say, myself, you, and Johnny, this is the first time we've ever seen this.
And why this is significant, I'm going to give you the punchline, and then I'll backfill it on Friday with more evidence and discussion. When I looked at this, there were three things that popped into my head. One, this is a representation, a model of the Large Hadron Collider itself. Number two, this is a model of a hydroelectric power generation plant. And number 3. What was my third one, Kev? I just lost my train of thought. It was, what was the third one? Anyway.
Was it the ring with the AWAKE or the nuclear reactors?
Oh, it was nuclear reactor.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you. That one was a little bit of a stretch, so I guess I forgot it. But essentially, it is akin to a nuclear reactor site, just the outside layout. What I'm getting at, let's talk about how it relates to CERN specifically. The circle is the main ring. Now, you see coming off of that what appears to be sort of a drain spout for water to trickle away from the circle. That's AWAKE. That's AWAKE conjoined. And then the lingus, which has been described somewhat errantly, has been described as a phallic symbol, is the north area. Okay, that represents the resurrection of the dead, the rising of the dead. That's why the phallic symbol, the obvious shape of it as well. But the birthing from DNA, from the north area, this is the resurrection in stone. At the top of that, you will see the all-seeing eye that is painted on the top of the lingus. Now, the better translation for a lingus is mark, as in the mark of the beast, and inference. The word inference, to me, jumps off the page because inference relates to hard X-rays that are produced by synchrotron particle accelerators that are then used to infer the shape, the three-dimensional shape of the proteins of our DNA. In other words, the lingus is producing X-rays to look at the DNA of resurrection, the resurrection of Nimrod's DNA in this case. This is the definitive, deeper aspect of the statue of Shiva standing outside the offices, the headquarters of CERN. This is the explanation as to why that statue is at CERN. It is because CERN was built, as with most of the high-tech equipment that we're seeing today, is built according to symbols, symbology, statues, diagrams that are used for communicating with fallen angels. The equipment, the cues for the layout of the equipment, including the octagonal shapes of the detectors inside CERN, inside the Large Hadron Collider. Okay? All of those things take their cues from the mystical practices. This is also the lingus. When you look down from the top, it is the shape of the ogdode, the egg, the primordial egg of the universe. That is the singularity in the discussion of the Big Bang. Kev, go ahead and jump in there. We got about 3 minutes.
Well, let's bring Johnny Whistles in here, man, because like Tony said, we've never seen these things before. And, you know, being like two of the Woo crew, Johnny, we should really reprimand ourselves. How have we never seen these before, John?
Exactly, Kevin. The pictures I was posting in the chat, it just amazes me to think that thousands of years ago, they were talking about this and using this technology or showing us that they had this technology way back then. It's absolutely fantastic. And the picture, the last one there, that one just blows my mind.
Like you say, this is not new information, and some of these Shiva lingus, they've been washing out of rivers 2,000 odd years old. So where does this come from? And it's because this information, this kind of hidden stuff, it's coming from another realm. And that's exactly where Dee was getting it from. It's exactly where Crowley was getting it from. And present day, it's exactly where Rose and Ladzinski have been getting it from. Only now we have the technology to realize all of the math, all of the algorithms from that Enochian messages, that Enochian alphabet. And I've posted one picture in the chat there, Tony, just before we go. We're going to be getting further into all of this on your show on Friday. But this one, like I shared with you, This is the coup de grace because we've got the Shiva Lingus. It goes into a black cube, and then sitting aside that is a massive statue of a bull, and surrounding all of it, multiple hundreds of miniature Shiva Lingus. Wow.
Yeah, so you've got all these little power generators all linked together, just like CERN does, with their linear, their PS, their SPS, and then the main ring of the LHC. You are pre-accelerating particles. That's what these lingus all together are. They're power generators, and they're all merging together. And people have thought that I was crazy linking D-Wave's black cube to the circular main ring of the Large Hadron Collider. And yet here it is as the Shiva Lingus and the black cube merged together. Okay? This is confirmation after confirmation. And as you said, you have to look back into history to know the present. And that's what we just demonstrated here today with Kev's eloquent quote.
Absolutely. And remember, folks, Awake is now switched on, but it's not going to be responsible for cracking the world in half or any earthquakes overnight, probably when you wake up in the morning. Some people on YouTube may claim that, but it's all building towards something, and I'm just glad we have got Anthony Patch here along for the ride, because I promised you, whatever the topic, we would get you the best information, and Anthony Patch brings it on all of this. It's been very technical tonight. I want to thank all of you. Absolutely brilliant stuff. All the people listening in. Check out Anthony's work at anthonypatch.com. Listen to him here on a Friday at 10 p.m. in the UK, 2 p.m. on the West Coast. Tomorrow night, we've got Ronnie LeBlanc, first-time guest. He's going to be talking about his book, Monsterland. Until then, wherever you are, make it TFR.
And didn't touch that dial.
Technology altogether. And you're going to be doing something slightly different tonight, because you're going to be explaining all of this to us, basically using CERN's own words, aren't you?
Yeah, I think it's important to report from the source on an event like this. And so I will briefly be reading some excerpts from CERN's own website. It is important to go to the source, and as you and I both do in our research that we share with each other, we go to multiple sources. We go to laboratories, we go to universities all over the world to their websites. But today, we're going to take primarily just from CERN itself. I do want to clarify a couple of things. Today is the start in 2017 of Awake. There was a first run in which, as they call it, taking data from the accelerator itself. In other words, there were protons that traveled through the 10-meter long plasma chamber, which is 4 centimeters in diameter, and struck the impact point or the beam dump at the end. And from that, they were able to take some preliminary data, which is all really just a commissioning. So there were some misunderstandings by some other people that were putting the word out through YouTube last year that Awake was colliding particles.
In months and years, how strangelets are made up of 3 quarks. You get an up quark, a down quark, and you get a strange one, Johnny. Now, I was going to go the strange one, but you stole it off me, dude. Whatever, it works. We are going to have an absolutely brilliant night tonight. And like I said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to tell you everything everything you need to know and everything you haven't been told about CERN's Awake experiment. Now, we spoke about Awake Linear Accelerator on the show before, but to mark the switching on of the machine this year, we're going to be joined by our good friend. Now, what is Awake? Well, the bullet point is that AWAKE is an acronym that stands for Advanced Proton-Driven Plasma Wakefield Acceleration Experiment. Now, AWAKE is collaborating with 16 scientific facilities around the planet. And get this, because one of those places is situated right here in the city of Glasgow at the University of Strathclyde. Now, to discuss all of this and to break it down for us, we are joined by our good friend, author, researcher, and fellow host on the network, Anthony Patch. Now, Anthony has authored a number of books, including Covert Catastrophe, 2048 Diamonds in the Rough, and he's the co-author of Revising Reality. He's currently working on his new book, Coalescence. You can find all of that, his research and more, over at anthonypatch.com. And you can hear him right here on Truth Frequency Radio, the home of the Anthony Patch Show. And we're very proud to say that right here on TFR. So to get into all of this and to waste no more time, Anthony, welcome back, brother. So soon, but it's great to have you back. And a big day today, Awake. We're back at this again.
Yeah, and thank you, Johnny, for having me back on the show today. We're going to be very technical today, just to warn people, but we'll stick to what is relevant. Why is it relevant? Why are we even talking about this particle accelerator? You know, it's kind of like, okay, this is deep stuff, but, you know, I got to go to work every day, so what difference does it make? Well, we're going to show you later on in the show. So that's a little bit of a teaser. Go ahead, Kev.
Over the years, we've all been working together. You really have built up a big audience who really are. They're hanging off every piece of research you do into all of this, Anthony. And it's great that we can come together, do this on KBS and on your show. And like I say, today, a very special day indeed, because we're used to hearing you and I talking about ring accelerators, the main ring at CERN. But this is a new piece of...
And it was screwing up the magnetosphere, and it was causing earthquakes, and it was creating wormholes and all kinds of nonsense. Nothing happened last year with AWAKE anywhere near that. So they were simply just commissioning, and really the commissioning started in September of last year. And that simply means that they're taking protons from the super proton synchrotron, the SPS, which is a accelerator that is ring-shaped that feeds or injects pre-accelerated particles into the main ring, where the particles are then increased in speed. They're bumped up by radio cavity and microwave cavity accelerators. But the point is, protons are accelerated starting with a linear accelerator and then a proton synchrotron and then a super proton synchrotron. These are all daisy-chained together leading up to the main ring. And it is from the SPS, the super proton synchrotron, that protons at a energy level or acceleration or mass energy equivalency of 400 giga-electron volts are then sent to AWAKE for their experiments. And that's what's happening today. They are moving from commissioning and the first run.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Kev Baker, and you're listening to the Kev Baker Show right here on Truth Frequency Radio, truthfrequencyradio.com. You can also listen to the show over on iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live, TuneIn Radio app, and like I always say, wherever you are, thank you for making it TFR. And what a show we've got lined up here tonight. And to do that, I have got my good friend and my co-host, Mr. Johnny Whistles. Johnny, special broadcast right here on the show tonight with our good friend Anthony Patch. You all locked and loaded for this one, Johnny. Are you awake yet?
Oh, I'm quite awake, Kev, but actually nowhere near as clever as you two people, because the both of you actually melt my mind. You were giving me a science lesson, Kev, before the show. Wow. It was like listening to Anthony Patch. Amazing.
Oh, please. And, you know, when we get Ben Emlyn Jones on, we say we're the three amigos, right? So we need something new, Johnny. And we have learned in recent